So comfortable like in saying that. It's like, I'm gonna do it again. It feels so good. Psilocybin mushrooms. It's so liberating. Here we are coming out of the psychedelic closet. Paul Stamets, my brother, come on up here. Shed your light, shed your wisdom. I freaking love you. Yes! Psilocybin mushroom.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I'm going to give a shout out and deep gratitude to the Costa Rican people, especially to the indigenous people of the New World who welcomed many of us Europeans. You know, we're very deeply grateful forever for your generosity and kindness and helping us survive. So we have a debt of gratitude to the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Let's make sure we pay it. And I want to thank my daughter, Ladina Stamets, who will not come on stage, and Pam, who's not going to come on stage, and Casey, so they're too shy. But anyhow, this has been a long, strange trip, and I'm really honored and grateful to be here to share this voyage with you. It's not only a voyage of discovery, it is a climax point in history. We're at a nexus where we can effect radical change with effective solutions that respect human rights, democratic principles, and the rights of ecosystems. The whole decriminalized nature movement is something that I'm very much in support of. So please support decriminalized nature. Go onto their websites. It's happening all over the United States right now. Santa Cruz just decriminalized psilocybin. Believe it or not, Washington, D.C. could be next. Okay, and you know, and Denver and Oakland, of course. You know, Denver did it as well. There's over 100 cities now that have signed up for the decriminalization of psilocybin and psychoactive plants. So this is something that I think is a civil rights movement for the freedom of consciousness. And we are at a revolution. So I hope that you all can join this. So I'm going to launch into this, and I have about 4 little clips of movies that are short, that I think are illustrative. And at the very end of this, I'm going to empower all of you. Wow. Testing. I'm going to try to empower all of you with the knowledge that you can grow your own psilocybin mushroom patch in your backyard. You'll be mycologically independent of anyone else. Because on a panel yesterday, when I was speaking about the use of psilocybin mushrooms, for me, it's not, you know, just taking a dried mushroom that someone gives you or you acquire somehow. It's not quite the same as encountering the life cycle, bonding with the organism. It's like the great peyote hunt. You know, on the peyote hunt, you find your sacrament, and then you bring it into a ritualistic setting. We have so much to learn from indigenous peoples because they have their rituals and their structures for the sacred use of these substances in a responsible manner. Those of us from European descent, you know, we struggle to be able to find the same constructs where we can use these substances responsibly. We have an enormous opportunity to learn from indigenous peoples, not to do cultural appropriation. This is very important. Those of us from European descent, there's been a multi-thousand-year history of the use of psilocybin mushrooms throughout Europe, and multi-thousand history use of psilocybin mushrooms in the Americas. And so we're unified around the world with our special place in bonding with these very, very important entities. So, psilocybin mushrooms and the mycology of consciousness. I show this slide because this is only a small portion, incredibly, of the universities that are currently approved by the FDA and other government agencies to do clinical studies on psilocybin right now. Now, I showed this, I gave a talk at Stanford Medical School, and it was interesting because my friend Pam, who's a medical doctor, was in the audience, and they announced I'm going to give a talk on psilocybin mushrooms, and there was 3 or 4 doctors that started sneering, in the audience. And the rest of the doctors are pretty quiet and reserved. And then I showed this slide, and those doctors that were sneering had FOMO, fear of missing out. They looked around, realizing that everyone else knew something that they didn't. So, this is why I want to unveil and demystify some of the history and use of psilocybin mushrooms for maximum public benefit. And this is something that I think is one of the most powerful tools that we have for making better citizens and better people. So here is a chart on the relative toxicity of drugs that are in common use. Alcohol, by far, is the most. The blue bar is the potential harm to yourself. The red bars are collateral damage to other individuals. Now you look at this chart, you can go from alcohol, heroin, you can go down to cocaine, all the way down to ketamine, and the far, far extreme on the right is psilocybin mushrooms. They have been identified as some of the least toxic, if not the most or the least toxic of all psychotropic substances that have ever been tested. So this has given the FDA confidence to approve clinical studies, because you can imagine all the clinical studies that have been approved for those other substances which are much more toxic than psilocybin. I populate this website called mushroomreferences.com. I primarily constructed this because many of the doctors and physicians that we place our confidence in, because they're higher authorities in the science of medicine, oftentimes were totally uneducated about the properties of medicinal mushrooms and psilocybin mushrooms. This is an unbranded labor of love for the commons. There is hundreds and hundreds of references. So go to mushroomreferences.com. This is written primarily for physicians, researchers, and graduate students, and also for what I call the intellectually curious. So I populate this once a week. I'm a victim of Google Scholar alerts. I put in too many keywords. I get too many articles. I gotta read them. So I call those, and I populate just this website for public benefit, and I update it about once a week. So let's explore the ancient use of mushrooms. Well, 22 primates consume mushrooms and know the differences between edible and poisonous ones. 23, when you include humans, we are primates. And the Golgi monkey of Bolivia consumes more than 12 times its body weight in a mushroom called Ascopolyporus. It's a lower canopy monkey growing in the Bolivian Amazon, but this mushroom is the absolute key food for the Golgi monkeys. Now, this is the most highest mushroom consumption species that we know of, but this also speaks to the fact that if there's 23 primates consuming mushrooms, that speaks to a very long evolutionary history with primates understanding that mushrooms are excellent as foods and as medicines. About 2 million years ago, our ancestors' brain suddenly enlarged. Homo sapiens only appeared evolutionarily 200,000 years ago. That's not very long ago. 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens migrated from Africa. We are all Africans genetically. We all came from Africa. So, and then within 4,000 years of contact, Neanderthals and Homo erectus had been in Europe for hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million years before Homo sapiens. But within 4,000 years of contact, Homo sapiens made the Neanderthals extinct. Homo erectus became extinct around 200,000 years ago, at the time that the human brain then suddenly enlarged. So how did that happen? Why did it happen? This has been a subject of debate for a long time with primatologists. It occurred at a time of rapid climate change. It's hard to read, but that red bar on the graph on the far right is when climate change became severe. And that is when Homo erectus, 75,000 to 200,000 BP, became extinct approximately in that time. And then the Homo sapiens evolved. Well, we're going through climate change right now. So I think it's very interesting that the human brain had to adapt to sudden climate change in a relatively short period of time. Our climate change is happening a lot faster than this. So let's look at something that Terence and Dennis McKenna proposed as the stoned ape theory. Now, the stoned ape theory was a speculative idea, not necessarily rooted in paleontological facts. And I have to admit myself, it was a good stoner conversation at night around the table. But increasingly, I think this theory needs to be re-examined. And to the credit of Terence and Dennis McKenna, I want to give a shout out to them. But the idea of the stoned ape theory was as climate change occurred and the savannas increased in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and our primate ancestors came out of the trees and they would be tracking animals. And when you're tracking animals, you look for footprints and you look for scat, you look for dung. They're over the horizon, you want to know where the herd is, you know, you're looking for the tracks they're making, and how old the dung is can tell you how many days ahead or how many hours ahead. So they're very, very important to be able to read and to follow the dung of these animals. So here's our primate ancestors walking across the savannah. They're hungry, they're a family, they're a tight clan. They come across, they find scat, dung. The largest mushroom growing out of dung is Psilocybin cubensis. Putatively, our ancestors, hungry, most primates eat grub. Grub grows from larvae in mushrooms. You consume the mushrooms. 20 minutes later, you have liftoff. And you're catapulted into an extrasensory, extraordinary experience that results in neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, new synaptic junctions, new ways of thinking, new ways of imagining. And this was then speculated as the reason why the skull enlarged was in order to accommodate the increased brain mass that was forming within. So look at the size of these psilocybes. They can be quite large. Imagine you and your family, you're hungry. You know you eat grub, you eat fly larvae. Most primates eat bug larvae. It's highly nutritious. Mushrooms support larvae. So you're looking for the mushrooms because you're hungry, they have larvae. They're quite obvious. The likelihood of this happening is just not happenstance once or twice. It's not just with 100 clans or tribal units. It would happen millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of times over tens and tens of thousands of years. Epigenetically, in epigenesis, the primary definition is that your DNA is influenced by environmental stimuli. And so external stimuli influence how proteins are coded and how your DNA elaborates. And so when you develop new genomic expressions that give you an added advantage, then those expressions then are coded and it becomes part of your genome. So this strikes me, and now as we understand better epigenetic theory, and then some of the most recent research that's come out in the past 4 or 5 years on psilocybin and neurogenesis, I think Terence and Dennis got it right. I think so here is the great late Terence McKenna and the stoned ape theory, and a great painting by our friend Alex Gray. Alex and Allison Gray are two psychonaut friends of ours, and it speaks to glossolalia, the ability of you to create language. And the idea under the psilocybin influence is that your inventiveness and creativity, not only in skill sets of tool making and visioning, but your ability to articulate, to see the ineffable, to see suddenly this massive fractalization. How are you going to communicate that to your family member, to your loved one? Many of us, under the influence, we turn to our friends and our partners, and we go, "Do you see what I'm seeing?" And they go, "Yes, we see it." You know, So it's something that's a bridge that really bonds the family units and friends together. So I like to suggest that we reframe this. It's not a stone date theory, it's a stone date hypothesis. My hypothesis is an educated guess, not necessarily explained by observable phenomenon. A theory is a hypothesis that has been tested by science and factually supported. This hypothesis, I think, is becoming a theory because now we can test psilocybin and brain neurons. And some of the information I'm going to show you today was first revealed at Stanford Medical School at a conference that I just recently attended. So you're the first group, outside the medical scientists, universities that will be seeing this information. So we go to 7,000 years ago. The first image that you'll see is a cave art, a pictograph from northern Algeria 7,000 years ago. Now, this is the original pictograph, and then a group of artists then enhanced it, still true to form. 7,000 years ago, this artist's intent is quite clear to all of us. This artist was very excited about mushrooms, don't you think? And yet, when this is published in several anthropological journals, not a single scientist would dare speculate what the artist's intention was. It's because of mycophobia. It's not only the irrational fear of mushrooms, but it permeates academia. And so when I first went to these conferences, I was treated like a leper. People didn't want to talk about magic mushrooms. They feared that being academically, assaulted. They could lose tenure. Their colleagues would make fun of them. They could show an academic weakness that would be exploited by some hyper-aggressive competitor within the university system. Well, mushrooms were preserved in honey, and still so in Mesoamerica, as well as in Europe, because as a preservative, mushrooms rot, as you know, very, very quickly, so that to be dried. But in high humidity environments, they can absorb water and rot again. So by preserving them in honey, then the psilocybin would leach out into the honey and a fermentation process would begin. Well, mushrooms, magic mushrooms, were an essential ingredient in the making of meads in Europe for probably thousands of years. But the Beer Purity Act of 1516, the Bavarian Beer Purity Act, largely driven by the Catholic Church, specifically banned mushrooms and henbane and other psychoactive substances from being used and put it into beer. This, I think, it illustrates the struggle between polytheism and monotheism. The church centralized control, finances, they had armies, they were connected with the governments, and they diligently went out to suppress indigenous culture. The indigenous cultures of Europe, my Germanic ancestors, gathered in the forest and used these mushrooms. And at that time, in Europe, the average age was 25, 26 years of age. So the likelihood of you losing your partner was extremely high. So being able to recouple after the loss of a loved one was absolutely essential to the indigenous cultures of Europe. Then monotheism, the churches came. Suddenly there was a cost and a fee, a toll in order for you to go through the gates to encounter enlightenment in the sense of Godhead. The churches then monetized and industrialized religion, and this unfortunately then led to the suppression of indigenous cultures all over the world. So those two side by side, you can see there's about 6 of these bee-man figures in northern Algeria. It was called the Toxicity Plateau, the plateau running rivers. And now, because of desertification, the Sahara Desert, has overcome that area. So this area suffered from radical climate change as well, only a few thousand years ago. Also within that cave is these running man figures. It's 7,000 years ago. And look at these. I mean, are those spores going to the brain? Are those ideas, going back and forth between the mushrooms and the brain? Again, I think the artist's intention is clear. And this is how we know about most of our art today. most of our history today is through the artists. So all of you artists out there, you are doing something that is a long, long tradition, and the window we have back into our past ancestry largely survives through the artwork. Now, we have suffered enormous calamities, and indigenous peoples have suffered enormously. In Europe, the burning of the library at Alexandria has been estimated more than 100,000, perhaps 1 million manuscripts were burned in one night. That was the largest collection of knowledge that was assembled. And this is, I think, this is several hundred years AD. So when we lost that knowledge, hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, we lost the body intellect of generations of scientists, researchers, philosophers, artists, etc. Well, indigenous peoples also lost their genetic their body intellect of knowledge when the Europeans came over, and intentionally and unintentionally they brought European diseases. And the indigenous peoples of the Americas, or we call it immunologically naive, they had no history in contact with smallpox, many of these flu viruses, many of these sexually transmitted diseases. So they suffered enormous losses. And oftentimes more than 90% of a village would die within a year or two. And in the Haida Gwaii of the Queen of British Columbia, the Northwest where I'm from, the Washington State, going up to British Columbia, the indigenous elders I spoke to after we become friends, even one of my shaman friends said something that was very potent, but we became brothers. And I'll quote him more or less. He said, "You gringos think us Indians know everything." He says, and he said, my great-great-grandmother knew so much. But he said, "Paul, think of it. We had 2 smallpox epidemics within 20 years, 2 flu epidemics within 20 years of each other, 4 epidemics within 60, 70 years, each one of which knocked down 90% of the population, especially the elders." So they lost enormous amounts of knowledge. So they have a rich history. That threads of this knowledge survive today, as it is with us from European backgrounds. This is why it's so important for us and for me to pass on this knowledge to all of you. We need to get this knowledge out there to as many people as possible so it can be preserved for the future. About 200 of these Mesoamerican mushroom stones are known, from 2700 BP to about 1500 BP before present. So this is actually before the time the conquistadors arrived. Because of climate change, the Mayan and Aztec cultures suffered. This religion literally went underground. And when the conquistadors came over, they had an edict from the Pope to destroy all effigies, all idols, and they wanted to suppress idolatry. These mushroom stones were identified as being a sign of idolatry of an ancient religion that the Mayans and the Aztecs were still practicing. So they were literally buried into the grounds. They may have had, it's speculative, we don't really know, but some of the prevailing hypotheses is like the coat of arms for a family. This is our family's mushroom stone, you hand it down. It could have marked territories, mushroom patches, but because so much of the water was caught from rainfall, it could also be speaking to the symbology that the presence of mushrooms meant the rains had returned, which are nourishing for the crops and essential for drinking water. I am greatly honored that I'm a temporary custodian of now, I think, 25 of these mushroom stones. They have come to me over the past 40 years. The one in the center is 2,500 years old. I have put it in my will, and I want to return all of these Mesoamerican mushroom stones back to the Mayan people. It is my destiny to be able to do that. This is the largest collection of Mayan mushroom stones in the world. This is literally what I look at every night when I go to bed. This is right in front of my bedroom door, and every morning when I wake up, I feel like I have a village of Mayan shamans and elders who are supporting me in my mission. And to have this grouping of them, understanding that I'm the temporary custodian, these are many thousands of years of age, they need to be protected and preserved. Now actually, I had them hidden in boxes with bubble wrap, etc. And an indigenous shaman came in to visit me and said, Paul, they're suffocating, they want to be out. And I said, but I'm in an earthquake zone, I don't want them to fall over, on my watch, that'd be terrible. So I made this mandala and I laid them down. So I feel they're safe now, they're happier. And I am giving a call out. I have 2 potential candidates right now of Mayan indigenous people. My intention is to give these away, provided that they're never sold. I cannot give them back to the Mayan government, because I've had 2 government officials that tell me, don't you dare. They'll just be sold back into the art market. And there is no one central place. If a Mayan entheogenic indigenous people museum could be created, that would be my ideal wish come true. And the idea then, these would be checked out by recognized indigenous shamans for ritualistic use. They would come to the museum, they would say, this is the mushroom stone that our people want to bond with. And then they would check it out like a library system and then return it. So anybody out there, just know my wish. Hopefully I'll live another decade or 2. But this is what my destiny is to return these. But it's got to be returned to a group that will not disseminate them and sell them off, but it'll be preserved for the next multi-thousands of years. So if you know of anybody out there, let me know. Okay? So in my previous talk, I like to always identify and give knowledge to my teachers, Dr. Michael Bugh holding the baskets, Dr. Alexandria Smith holding the big mushrooms, Daniel Stunts, and then Kit Skates. These are the 4 people that took me under their wing. Now, as I mentioned before, I was a logger hippie for a few years up in the woods in the summertime. I was self-taught on psilocybin mushrooms. I immersed myself into the taxonomy of them, spending hundreds of hours literally at the University of Washington, a science library, and then they took me under their wing. Now, this is really significant because not Michael, but Alexander Smith and Daniel Stunts were politically pretty conservative people. Well, this is amazing. They took me under their wing as sort of their mascot student because this is what I looked like. So, dudes. And that's my first run of growing Psilocybin cubensis. And so Psilocybin cubensis became very popular to grow in the 1970s, largely because of the number of books, Terence and Dennis McKenna's book being the primary one, and growing them on grains, typically on rice or rye grain, in jars or in trays. And the Psilocybin cubensis Scholarship Fund is what I called it. And people grow psilocybin mushrooms in their dorm rooms, etc. And people were just trading them, selling them. No one's getting rich. They're just paying tuition, buying food, at the Compass, stores. So just reinvesting money back into the local economy. But this was a huge, huge influence, again, in the closet. Now people are coming out of the closet. I know some very important government officials who confessed to me that they grew Psilocybin cubensis when they were at Harvard, at Yale, and other universities. This is something I've never told anybody this, but let me know. Because I mentioned the Psilocybin cubensis Scholarship Fund, and they said I was a recipient of that. So it's interesting how people now are coming out of the closet to share their experiences. So in 1977, Dr. Gaston Guzman, is quite obvious which one he is, Gary Menser, Stephen Pollock, myself, and then Dale Leslie went on the Great Psilocybin Mushroom Species Expedition from Oregon into British Columbia. And I became a good friend of Ken Kesey's and the Merry Pranksters, and they were totally hooked into the Grateful Dead, and the Grateful Dead were really fond of psilocybin mushrooms, so that's sort of like psilocybin mushroom music scene just sort of emanated out from them. And then we started doing a series of conferences in 1979. Now, in 1979 also is when Dr. Michael Bugh received a Drug Enforcement Administration license, which I was covered under. And he received the license because Michael and I were called by defense attorneys to represent defendants in criminal cases where students, mostly, the young people, have been busted for possession of psilocybin mushrooms. I was a taxonomist, and I could make the arguments that it's reasonable in the United States at the time for everyone to know what a marijuana leaf looks like. How many of you know what a Psilocybe cystis looks like? Well, it's unreasonable. So, because of the unreasonableness of expectation to everyone to be a mushroom taxonomist, everyone's expected to know what marijuana leaves looks like. We were able to get many of these cases thrown out of court. And then Michael was able to show that the government analyses were inaccurate. So he went on to publish an accurate analytical method in the scientific literature that was adopted by the DEA for accurate identification of psilocybin and psilocybin mushrooms. So that gave him favor with the DEA, and then I was covered, and then Jeremy Bigwood was also covered for being able to possess and cultivate psilocybin mushrooms. My logic was, I can't find them in the wintertime, so government, I need to cultivate them. I cultivated a lot of them. So very strangely, Michael Bugh, our dear professor, such a nerdy, wonderful guy, he had 3 students, Jonathan Ott, Jeremy Bigwood, and myself. Between the 3 of us, we've published, I think, over 17 books. And I'd like to mention, as I mentioned before, Michael was the best of teachers. He was kind and patient and funny, and he never shamed me. Not once. I would say the stupidest things, and he never mocked me. He would laugh with me. He would turn my embarrassment around into humor. And in that humorous state, I was so receptive to his criticism. That's a good lesson for us all. Don't shame somebody. You know, help them evolve, right? Yeah. So for 40 years, I myself and about 2-3 other people conducted a series of magical mushroom conferences from 1976 to 2017. And we had the Myco-Media conferences that went on for 10 years at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. And then we had a reunion in 1999, and there's further from Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, the famous bus. How many people here know the Merry Pranksters, who they are? And Jack Kerouac, you know, On the Road, you know, and so Ken Kesey was an author, wrote the book Sometimes a Great Notion, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, with Jack Nicholson, fantastic, you know, film about reflecting on what it means to be, quote, mentally disturbed. So I realized that I knew the scientists, Sasha Shulgin and all these other scientists at Harvard, and I knew the Merry Pranksters and the Grateful Dead community and that whole circle of people. So I thought, well, this is great. I'm the nexus point between these 2 cultures or subcultures. Let's bring them together. So I brought them together for the 1999 Millennium Mushroom Conference. Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters showed up in force. Sasha Shulgin's there, Andy Weil, Ann Shulgin, David Aurora, all these other psychodynamic experts from around the world, Christian Retch. And we have 40 presenters and 80 participants, non-presenter participants. So I lost my shirt. I lost $50,000 on this event. The best $50,000 I've ever spent in my life. Yeah. And we made these bridges. It was great because Ken Kesey stole all this LSD and other psychedelic substances from the University of Oregon, and Sasha Shulgin was the one who made them. And so Sasha found out that Ken Kesey was the one who stole his drugs. And there's a big controversy back then about what happened to him, and it was great. Up on stage, they realized that Ken goes, "I took those." You know? So there was a tremendous interest, of course, all over the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, permeated elsewhere. We discovered that you didn't have to go to Mexico to find these mushrooms in the tropics. They were showing up everywhere in the Pacific Northwest, wherever wood chips was laid down. Now this struck mycologists by surprise, because some of them have been studying mycology for 40 or 50 years. They've never seen a psilocybin mushroom, because they're hidden in the landscape. But it's the advent of beauty bark, wood chips, for landscaping, that suddenly in the urban and suburban areas, these psilocybin mushrooms rushed out of the ecosystem and appeared in massive quantities. In the Pacific Northwest, finding a psilocybin mushroom in a truly native environment is extremely rare. There's only one species, Psilocybe folliculosa, that I know you can find in a truly native environment. They occur in disturbed environments. Who makes the greatest disturbance in the ecosystem of any organism on this planet? We do. And so these psilocybin mushrooms have been uprising, following the paths of human activity. They're trail followers. We are creating trails. It's like they're appearing out of the landscape at a time critical in climate change, where they need to affect the next quantum leap in the evolution of human consciousness. I think they are directing us. So Terence McKenna, Andy Weil, Gary Menzer, and Stephen Pollack, and myself, we were the 5 primary people, experts in the scene at that time, that was spreading information about psilocybin mushrooms. There's my good buddy Ken Kesey, and in front of the bus the further. Ken and I had a few things in common. You know, he was an ex-logger, so was I. We're both very good at chainsaws, one of the few things I'm good at. I'm good with a chainsaw. So Ken and I were talking, and I said, "Ken, I'm going to make you a special chainsaw oil, just for you." So I made Sporus de Illuminatus, the merry pranksters, the merry mushroom pranksters, Omnis Psilocybe Munda, 200 million spores of Psilocybe azurescens. So as he's running his chainsaw, he's then inoculating every piece of wood that chainsaw is cutting. All of you can do this today, right? Linseed oil, okay? Don't use petroleum oils. So anyhow, or canola oil. So anyhow, this is one way of being able to effectively inoculate a hardwood forest with psilocybin mushrooms, is just putting the spores into the chainsaw. Numerous books came out, and this is some of them. I have 6 books out, but some of the other books, my favorite is The Golden Guide to Hallucinating Plants, what every 13-year-old needs to study, or 8-year-old for that matter. That book had a 1-press run. It's quickly objected to by the Nixon administration and the Parent Teachers Association, known as the PTA, and it was quickly pulled off the shelves. This little book now that's sold for $1.95, I think it is now sells for over $500 a copy. So this is a great collector's item. Okay, so there's 4 of the species that I published: Psilocybe azurescens, leniformans, Cinefibulosa, and Wiley-eye. And here's a short movie. I'm going to do an audio now. Okay, here we go.
Greetings, and meet Psilocybe azurescens. Psilocybe azurescens is probably one of the most potent mushrooms in the world. It contains psilocybin and psilocin up to 2% of its dried mass. Now think of that. 2% of the dried mass of this mushroom are psychoactive crystals. Why would a mushroom produce so much? We don't know, but it certainly has attracted the interest of humans. The bluing that you see here is a bruising reaction. It's indicative of psilocin as it degrades. And the more bluing you see, the more psilocin there once was. Now psilocybin dephosphorylates into psilocin, and when you ingest these mushrooms, psilocin becomes a serotonin agonist. It means that the psilocybin, or the psilocin, becomes a temporary neurotransmitter, opening up the floodgates of the senses. Now this mushroom is sinuous. It's got a sinuous stem, which means it bends back and forth. It is bluing very, very strongly, and it has these very indicative spore color here on the annular zone. And the spore color is purple-brown, and the mushrooms are bluish. Those 2 features in combination pretty much de facto determines its psilocybe. Now look how bodacious the rhizomorphs are at the base of the stem. This is a large psilocybe, by far the largest one that I know, that grows on wood chips in the Pacific Northwest. It is now a popular one to have in your backyard. It's just fun. It's just naturalized in the woods here. And this is a beautiful fruiting of them. And the psilocybes, many of the woodland psilocybes have this chestnut brown to caramel color. This one is unique in that it's got these umbos, and there is a broad umbo, and the cap is very circular. The bruising reactions just from impact of rain, perhaps. This mushroom is one of the most fascinating and interesting ones to grow. Those who choose to partake of this mushroom should be warned. These are exceptionally potent, and oftentimes they can cause temporary paralysis, loss of muscle control. So that is not a good thing. It seems that most people who boil this mushroom in hot water, those symptoms seem to be alleviated. But this is clearly a sacred species, and I love just personally touching it. This is not a mushroom that I enjoy eating. It's almost too potent for me. And but it is a species that I greatly admire. I love touching it. I love handling it. I love seeing it. And it's a great indicator of the habitat in my magical mushroom forest that is very conducive to spiritual experiences.
So you'll be hearing more about Psilocybe azurescens, but there's another species called Psilocybe cyanescens, wavy caps. You saw that azurescens is a very even cap, and cyanescens has a wavy cap. They both are growing wood chips, very easy to domesticate in your backyard. If you're in the northern latitudes, basically you need to have freezing temperatures. So if you're in a climate that has repetitive freezing temperatures 3 or 4 times in the winter time, then these mushrooms are likely to be able to be cultivated in your backyard. So Psilocybe azurescens and Psilocybe cyanescens, well, look at the difference in size. Psilocybe azurescens is humongous in comparison to cyanescens. So Psilocybe azurescens is the most potent and the largest wood chip inhabiting psilocybin mushrooms in North America, and the most potent one in the world. Several other species, Psilocybe ellenii, is all over the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area. Psilocybe cyanescens again, then Psilocybe stuntzii, that was named after Dr. Daniel Stuntz at the University of Washington. Now, it's very important that all of you know this, is some mushrooms are deadly poisonous. And you may all know that some mushrooms are deadly poisonous, but you may not know that a mushroom that grows in wood chips that looks very similar is Galerana autumnalis, Galerana marginata. These are 2 species, and they have the deadly amanita toxins, alpha-amanitins, that can kill you. And when I found this cluster of them, where 2 of these mushrooms, one containing psilocybin, the other one deadly poisonous, growing so close together that they were touching, I realized this is really important, that as a matter of public health, that people are educated about the differences, so people don't actually pick these and die. Unfortunately, we've had several deaths from people commingling Galerinas with psilocybes. Galerinas have purple-brown spores, Galerinas have rusty-brown spores. That's one very big difference, so you have to know your spore color. Psilocybin mushrooms typically bruise bluish, and they have purple-brown spores. Those are 2 features in conjunction with each other, and there's very, very few exceptions. So my books describe specifically how to safely identify these mushrooms from their close lookalikes. Psilocybe semilanciata, the Liberty cap, grows in pastures from New Zealand to Chile to New Brunswick to British Columbia, down through southern Oregon. It loves to grow in sedge clumps around ponds. Psilocybe pelliculosa looks similar, but it's a woodland psilocybin mushroom. This is the only one I found truly in an old-growth forest that's been undisturbed. It's indigenous to the Pacific Northwest. And in talking to multiple First Nations friends of mine, there's 1 or 2 cases where the comrades, my friends about my age, who knew of their grandfather speaking about mushrooms, but they had no direct knowledge. Several of them have told me they did not know about psilocybin mushrooms in the Northwest until the hippies brought psilocybin mushrooms to the indigenous peoples. So the hippies brought back knowledge of psilocybin mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest. If anyone can document the use of psilocybin mushrooms by indigenous peoples in the Pacific Northwest, I've been looking for 30 years. So I'd love to have that information, and I think it's wonderful that we are all on this earthship together and we can share these riches. Now, the use of psilocybin mushroom by indigenous peoples is common now, but in the 60s and 70s, as far back as we've tracked with all of our experts, we can't find any example of indigenous use in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, in Mesoamerica, South America, and Mexico, multi-thousand-year traditions, but those are very different species than we have in the colder regions of North America. So Nancy Reagan, if you were alive today, on the left is your brain without psilocybin. On the right, at least on my computer here, is your brain with psilocybin. Which brain do you want? So maybe not just say no, just say yes to psilocybin mushrooms. This shows it's a connectogram by Robin Carhart Harris. It's quite famous. He was showing that the brain basically is more informed, has better networks of communication, is more integrated, and allows for the elasticity of thinking, and is neurologically a lot more active than in the quote-unquote resting state or normal state. So psilocybin, we now know, affects the hippocampus on neurogenesis and the extension of the conditioned trace fear response. I'll come back to that later. Mystical type experiences. This is Roland Griffith's first article that was published, given an FDA permission of a clinical study with the volunteers. And 14 months after this experience, the volunteers rated it at the top 5 of their most meaningful spiritual experiences of their lives. And it persisted longer than the experience. They were given relatively high doses, equivalent to about 3 to 4 grams of cubensis, and the 30% of the people had negative experiences. They were all what we call psychedelically naive. They had never taken psychedelics before in this group. But what's interesting is that people who had negative experiences, the negativity did not extend more than the experience itself. And the people who had positive experiences, upon reflecting upon the experience 14 months later, it made them feel good. Now this is carried over into PTSD. There's multiple clinical studies, and if you are an Afghan or if you're a war veteran, no matter what war it is, you associate a gunshot with a PTSD event, then you hear another firecracker go off or something, you have that conditioned fear response. They found that under clinical settings, going through their PTSD experiences with clinicians, that if they took these psilocybin mushrooms, addressed these issues, then months, years later, when they reflected on their psilocybin mushroom session, it overwrote, so to speak, the PTSD code, and they no longer have PTSD associated, again, from that firecracker, they associated their mushroom experience. So it replaced the association of the conditioned fear response with a positive experience. That is unprecedented in psychiatry. So I went to Johns Hopkins, and I saw that little mushroom stone. I could not believe it, because only 20 of those were made, and myself and a friend of mine made them. And so I've been in 700 sessions at Johns Hopkins. My handiwork is that little mushroom stone. The casting broke, so I couldn't make it anymore. But I was making it with catalytic cement. And so I was shocked that they had this mushroom stone. Where'd you get this? They go, someone gave it to us. I go, this is amazing. So I want to show now a short clip from the movie Fantastic Fungi. And Steve, I might be going over about 15 minutes. I'm so sorry. But this is really important that you see this. How many people here have seen the movie Fantastic Fungi? So here's a short clip of some of the patients from Johns Hopkins who went through psilocybin therapy.
Anyone who's had one of those experiences in a country where it's not legal to have them is stuck in this position where something really precious and really giving a great gift to you is not understood by the culture at large, and furthermore puts you or other people and other people at risk of prosecution. And one response to that is to get angry and to want to fight that. And another response to it is to say, we've just got to explain to people what's going on here. And when people understand it, then there will be accommodation and respect.
I've been diagnosed with prostate cancer. My diagnosis was so bad that it was, they weren't giving me any chance whatsoever.
My diagnosis was kidney cancer. Finding out that you may want to get your affairs in order.
I first found out about the study when my oncologist gave me a pamphlet. He said, here's something that might be able to help you with the anxiety. And I was accepted into the study.
The most important thing is to remember that you're always safe, and a recommendation is that whatever is coming up, that you allow it, that you don't have to like it, but you say, okay, rather than trying to run away from it. Once a volunteer is enrolled in the study, they're with us for the preparation, the psilocybin sessions, and the integration follow-ups after. I have been a guide for around 350 psilocybin sessions, and then about 1,000 of the preparatory and integration meetings.
All right.
It's really just about experiencing what comes up as psilocybin takes effect.
And the intense part of this journey, this world and things that matter to most people, family and all that, that wasn't even what it was about. They say anything mystical can't be explained. It's something like that. It's a feeling of such immense power that you can't even imagine. I've never felt anything like it before. It was about being in a place of infinite space and just being there.
There's an experience of positive mood, sometimes open-heartedness, love, transcendence of time and space, and then finally it's thought to be ineffable. People say, I can't describe that experience.
In my mind, I said, okay, hold it. If I give myself over to you, can you promise me that I will be in at least as strong a shape as when I entered this room? And I felt a voice that I needed to heed. Do you think I would disrespect my own handiwork? This is the voice from on high saying, do you think I would disrespect my child? And I felt so beautiful. I felt like I have never felt before. My sense of being loved, of being worthy of love, of being cared for, of being important to someone. It's huge.
Individuals in the study said it's the single most spiritually significant experience of their lives. About 70% say it's among the 5 most personally meaningful experiences of their lives. And you say, well, so what does that mean? You know, and initially I thought, I wonder if they don't have pretty dull lives. But you know, people would say, you know, when my firstborn came into this world, I'll never forget that, and life has never been the same since. Or my father passed away, that was deeply moving to me. I'm different now in the world. And so, you know, it's kind of like that.
The most glorious part was that it made me feel more comfortable with living, you know, because you're not afraid of dying.
Frankly, I'm just a laboratory scientist, and I wasn't prepared for that.
From the memory of the transcendental state of consciousness, many people report less anxiety, less depression, less preoccupation with pain, closer interpersonal relationships, and perhaps most impressive, they claim to have a loss of the fear of death.
It recalibrates how they see death. It's been amazing hearing them talk about this idea of love. Many of them spoke about how nature itself is something like this substance called love. And having touched that, they've recalibrated it and shaped how they die differently.
Since time is short, I'm going to go through these very quickly. These are some meta-studies, 480,000 people that through surveys. These were prisoners. And association necessarily is not causation, but it can be. So in disambiguation of this data, these results are pretty profound. If you've had one use of psilocybin mushrooms by this prisoner survey, there's a 27% decrease odds of past year larceny and theft, 22% decrease of odds for property crime, and an 18% decrease odds for a violent crime. Think of that. Now, another study came out, 1,266 community members, and there was a dramatic drop in partner-to-partner violence. Interestingly, localized with men. So if your partner, your male partner, had one psilocybin experience, they were less likely, statistically significantly less likely to have to commit partner-to-partner violence. So I thought on the dating apps for you young people, have you ever tripped on psilocybin? Yes. Hey, you have not? I'm staying away from you, right? So other studies, basically on a recognition of faces and association with emotive abilities, the abilities to have empathy to a loved one or to a stranger. A reset mechanism has been proposed, and this is what the FDA is now very excited for those who are suffering from treatment-resistant depression, which is defined as not gaining benefit from 2 FDA-prescribed antidepressant drugs. That means you're treatment resistant, then you qualify for the psilocybin use. So many of these universities are actively recruiting. My friend Dr. Pam Crisco and I went on to the NIH Gov homepage. There's 41 current studies at nih.gov.grants. You can check them out, and so there could be recruiting in your cities at your local universities. So many universities are involved in this. Really interesting. Another meta study, there's an increased nature-relatedness and a decreased authoritarian political views. Well, that's interesting. That's kind of a pro-democracy, influence on society. So you have decreased criminalization or decreased criminal activity, and you have a decreased influence by authoritarian figures that I can think of a few people right now that could benefit from this. And the pro-environmental behavior in yet another study shows that strongly encourages and engages you with nature. very interesting retroactive studies. So psilocybin induces neurogenesis, courage, and kindness. These are leadership skills, and it leads to better citizenship, reducing crime, and reducing recidivism, and reducing the clogged court systems that are so inefficient, reducing criminalizing and training innocent people who are in possession of psilocybin, for instance, to become criminals because they're unjustly and unfairly incarcerated. They then become abused. They suffer from PTSD. I mean, think of the benefit. It's in the hundreds of billions of dollars if we can reduce, crime by 20 or 30% in this country and reduce partner-to-partner violence, etc. So, a proposal by Johns Hopkins researchers, including Roland Griffiths, is to remove psilocybin from Schedule 1 to Schedule 4, which is equivalent to an over-the-counter asthma medicine that can be called in by a physician to a drugstore. So how many people here read the book, How to Change Your Mind? And there's Michael Pollan and myself, and there's 40 pages of my work in this book. And a big part of the movement right now is in microdosing, which I just describe as epigenetic neurogenesis. It is swept through Silicon Valley. I know of many people who are engaged in training some of the top coders of the most well-known computer and internet companies that you all use every day. They believe that gives them extra creativity for coding. It gives them a competitive edge. And so with the blessings or the blind eye of their supervisors and owners of these companies, the rampant use of psilocybin and microdosing is commonplace now. It's increasingly not the exception, but the norm. So another mushroom I wanted to bring your attention to is lion's mane. It stimulates nerve growth factors, hericenones and erinacines. The erinacines come from the mycelium, the hericenones come from the mushrooms. It's the erinacines that are specifically very powerful. There's 2 randomized clinical studies in Japan against mild cognitive impairment and postmenopausal depression, showing significant benefits as long as the patients continue to take lion's mane, about 2 to 4 grams per day in a capsule form. So these studies, the benefits continued as long as the people continued taking the lion's mane. These people were identified on a steady incline towards dementia and pre-Alzheimer's, and as long as they continued to take the mushrooms, they benefited. After the study and after the treatment period was over, they then resumed that decline into dementia. A very important note. Well, the formation of amyloid plaques is either an artifact or it interferes with neurotransmission. And demyelination is the removal of the myelin sheath on the axons of nerves. And the amyloid plaques form, it prevents neurotransmission. Basically, it blocks signaling. And so the lion's mane mushrooms, mycelium, is shown to remove amyloid plaques and cause remyelination, regeneration of the sheath that is transmitting the nerve signals on the axons of your brains. We've conducted a number of studies. This is some of the recent work that we did with a company called Neurofit in France. And we're comparing lion's mane, mycelium, and fruit bodies. We compared fruit bodies, but they were not as active. The mycelium was far more active. And we used brain-derived nerve growth factors, these are basically young neurons and extract made into it and spiked into pluripotent stem cells, iPSCs. And this then they can measure from the controls in BDNF where there's an increase in neurite outgrowth, neurons, young neurons, growing and differentiating. And we had you can see about an 8% increase in neurons. Then I thought we'd start stacking these and comparing it to psilocybin analogs. Now I no longer have a DEA license, so these psilocybin analogs are perfectly legal. And so there's 3 of them, X, Y, and Z. They're beocystin, neurobeocystin, and norpsilocin. And these are also in the dimethyltryptamine group associated tightly with a psilocybin molecule and psilocin, either as a precursor or as a derivative. So this is extraordinary results that we see. When we combine lion's mane, mycelium, and psilocybin analogs, Well, we repeated the experiment with lion's mane. Now it's not 8% increase, it's 14.8. So it's basically in the same range. That's good. That validates the previous results. And then the three analogs that I mentioned created 7%, 22%. But when we stacked lion's mane and one of these analogs together, we got a 36%. Now that is greater than the predicted additive effect. If you were to add these together, 1.7 and 1.14, 1.22, 1.23 with the fractions, so you expect a 23%. We got a 36% increase in neural outgrowth, showing synergism, showing the entourage effect of these psilocybin analogs combined with lion's mane enhance neurogenesis, activating other subsets of receptors and be able to increase neural outgrowth. This is phenomenal, folks. This is unprecedented. And that's done in 12 days. 12 days from taking this, you're actually seeing neurological benefits. So this is a hard to see slide, but basically these are the stem cells of the brain neurons and what happens after they've been exposed. This is the case 10 days. So I want to go back to this on the trace fear conditioning. And this is really important, and most researchers have missed this one article. They were basically comparing macrodoses with microdoses on the neurogenesis in the hippocampus of mice. It's a very simple experiment. They would put the mice in an arena with a metal floor. They give a tone, dong. 40 seconds later, they'd electrify the floor. They'd shock the mice. So 40 seconds later, after the tone, they'd be electrified. So after 10 times, when those mice heard that tone, they knew that they're going to get shocked. So they cower in fear. That's called the conditioned fear response. What is remarkable is that at 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight, which equivalents to about 0.7 of a gram of psilocybin cubensis at 1% concentration, at 0.1 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, it's not 1 gram of cubensis now, it's about 1/10 of a gram or less. When they dose the mice that have been fully conditioned to fear that tone and to associate it with shock, at the maximum dose, at the high dose, the tripping dose, it took 10 rotations of not being shocked before they dissociated the tone with pain. With the low dose, it only took 2 times. Now that's counterintuitive. Less is more. And so we're very excited because I am proposing a nootropic vitamin complex, like stacking formula, using psilocybin and psilocin and or their analogs with lion's mane, and then stacking it with vitamin B3. Vitamin B3 niacin is a flushing niacin. If you take 100 milligrams of niacin, most of us will get a hot flush. If you put 100 milligrams of niacin with 1/10 of a dose of psilocybin, if you tried to take 10 times that much, you'd be taking a full gram to 2 grams of niacin. It's an adversive. The adverse effects would be it'd be like the antabuse for alcoholics. And so the idea is to make this an over-the-counter medicine that'll become a vitamin for the masses that'll be very inexpensive. And so everyone then can benefit from microdosing. Now, niacin also serves a function of vasodilation, and it also excites the nerve endings. So the idea is to vasodilation, you have more of the neurogenic benefits of psilocybin and lion's mane going through your blood. It excites the endpoints of the peripheral nervous system. Neuropathies oftentimes present themselves as deadening of the fingertips and the toes. So there's 3 synergistic benefits of being able to take niacin. And if they're approving this to the FDA for heroic doses of psilocybin, then I think it's a very likely pathway for being able to use this as an antidepressive, anti-anxiety, and a medicine for creativity. We all will slip into some form of dementia. The loss of the body intellect of our culture, of elders losing their knowledge that they can't pass on. How do you put a monetary metric on that? You know, it's so important that we all remain cognitively astute so we can pass on to the next generations, and you will become elders. So think of that. The knowledge that you have so painstakingly absorbed and created and understood. How are you going to pass it on to the next generation? Well, I think these substances could be very helpful. So there's several things you can do. You can make chocolates. Note to self and daughter, please mark your microdoses. Was that 1 gram or 1/10 of a gram? Oh, shit. So please, and keep them out of the reach of children, all right? So, you know. Or you can make blue juice, where I found that if you melt ice cubes and you put the ice cubes back in the refrigerator or on top of fresh psilocybin mushrooms, you can do a cold water extraction. And you extract out the psilocybin and psilocin in this blue juice. And then you freeze it for Burning Man, right? Blue cubes. Okay, so I need to finish up here. So here's the Fatima Protocol. James Fatima, he recommended dose on day 1, no dose on days 2 and 3, dose on day 4. I suggest 4 days on, 2 to 3 days off. James and I compared notes. I said, how did you come up with your protocol? And he goes, well, how did you come up with yours? And I said, I made it up. And he goes, he did too. So the idea we both share in common is to watch the receptors so they renormalize, so they resensitize. So your endogenous, pathways are not conditioned upon an external stimulus, so you can be able to keep the natural pathways intact. So I and my friends, Ismail and Kaylin and Dr. Crisco have launched a new app. You can download it right now. It's at microdose.me is the website. It's on Quantified Citizen on the App Store for Apple right now, Apple devices, not for Droids yet. But this is the largest microdose app collection of individuals in history. It's gone through peer review of ethics. It asks you what you're taking, how much you're taking per day. Was it pre-weighed? Did you stack it with something? Lion's mane, chocolate, peanut butter? And then it has memory tests. Can you then reflect on what flowers lit up? It's got hearing. It's got visual acuity. So we can measure if your hearing is improving or your vision is improving from microdosing. It's very, very well elaborated. We have over 115,000 people have now downloaded this. About 23,000 people are active users. This, again, we're trying to create a metadatabase that we can harvest signal from the noise so we can help clinicians devise clinical studies. Oftentimes, it is not what you intended to study. It's a unexpected event, an unexpected benefit. And so that's what we're seeing so much, is that these psilocybin mushrooms, because they're basic to neurogenesis, and your neurology is such critical for all your behavior, that it elaborates out to all these endpoints. And so we're trying to figure exactly what endpoints are most significant. So please, this is a free app. It's for the commons. It's anonymized. You own your own data. You can track your regeneration or degeneration, the case may be. You don't have to be doing psilocybin or LSD microdosing. You can just be, doing your normal activities without any drugs, just to measure your cognitive abilities over time. Now, this is really important because something I'm passionate about. It is absurd that psilocybin in the pharmaceutical form is so expensive. $7,000 per gram. It's coming down to $500 to $1,000 per gram. But what about the people who can't afford to spend $10,000 with Compass Pathways to have a clinical study in a hospital? This is why the underground psilocybin movement is so important that we protect, because that gives universality of access to all these other people who don't necessarily have to go or can afford to go into a clinical setting. That being said, let's be responsible adults, all of us here. I fully understand the need to go party and dance and get high when you're 16 to 22 years of age. But after that, folks, time to grow up. Okay? So, shepherd these younger people with kindness and empathy, but guide them. Go walk on the beach. Talk about your life. Talk about the things that are meaningful to you. Talk to your loved ones. Deal with your parental issues. Learn from this. These are powerful tools that can change your life forever. And when you're creative, you're happier, and when you're happier, you're more creative. It's a binary choice in life. If you're depressed, you're not creative. Not creative, you're not happy. If you're an artist and you work on a fantastic painting until midnight, the next morning you want to get up and work on that painting again because you're so inspired. This is what we need. We need to become more creative and intelligent so we can come up with the solutions to invent ourselves out of this disaster that is the failing of the ecosystems, and we can do it together. So here's another strange psilocybin mushroom called Gymnopolis luteofolius, and I have a short story. It's a very rare mushroom. Very few mycologists can identify this. It grows associated with alder trees in the Northwest. Sound? It's just hard to believe that Paul Stamets' boat will be growing a psychoactive mushroom, but it's true. I know it's not the best specimen right now, but this is Gymnopolis luteofolius. It is unique to alder. It's a very rare species. In fact, most mycologists would not be able to identify it. I just happen to have a specialty in this area. And it's so weird because my friend Clay here, hey Clay, he said he found the mushroom going off of a boat and he brought it to me from your friend, right?
That Arstine Island boat launch.
And it was also Gymnopolis luteofolius. So it begs the question now, is this mushroom indigenous to Northwest boats? And I've never found this in the wild. I've seen it at a mycological society, but I go figure. Now, I'm not going to pick it, so I guess I'm not breaking the law. Or am I breaking the law because it's growing here and I know what it is? I don't know what to do. Anyhow, how bizarre. Gymnopolis luteofolius on Stamets' boat, and we've had more than one sighting of this on this boat, and more than one boat now, 2 boats. So, go figure. So I wonder if the Santa Maria, when the pilgrims came over from Europe, was it fully myceliated? And when the boats landed, and many of these boats were deconstructed to build houses, they became mycelial footprints, bringing in psilocybin mushrooms from Europe to North America. Okay, so I'm clearly out of time, but this is so important. Let me show you something that is just truly revolutionary in its simplicity.
Yeah.
Is stem butts regrow. Psilocybin stem butts regrow. The mushrooms, if you pick them and you throw them into the ground, they'll rot. But the stem butts don't. So you take a stem butt here of the garden giant, you can cut it, and then you can take the stem butts of a psilocybin mushroom, and you need fuzzy feet, stem butts. The stem butts with all those rhizomorphs and hairs. Now, animals don't eat the stem butts. They go and deer and pick up the mushrooms, they bite the mushrooms, they drop the stem butts. Maybe this is why stem butts have evolved to regrow. And the stem butts are immunologically educated to the microbiome. This is really important. It's not the baby in the bubble syndrome. You're not using a laboratory. You're just collecting wild mushrooms, and you trim off the stem butts, and then you put it into cardboard that's been soaked. You wrap it up in a piece of cardboard. 2 weeks later, the stem butts regrow into mycelium. And then you have the mycelium running on cardboard. You can also inoculate wooden dowels with stem butts. And there's a specific technique about this. Are we losing our screen?
You brought the rain.
It's
Paul.
raining. Oh, it's perfect for mushrooms. Let it rain. A few little song coming on. You put the stem butts then in a cardboard box out back, and 4 months later, look how tenacious the mycelium is. Then you can use that mycelium to inoculate. And now here is a short 1.5-minute video. I'm not sure can you guys see it or not? No? Okay.
Yeah.
So in this video, basically this is what you do. I can just tell you. You just end up putting wood chips into water or straw. If you're growing Psilocybe cubensis, you use straw. If you're growing Psilocybe cyanescens, azurescens, other than these wood chip psilocybes you put it into alder or conifer chips. Don't use cedar, don't use redwood, don't use juniper. You put wood chips underwater in a tub. You let it soak for 2 weeks. You let it go anaerobic. A bacterial slime will form on top. It goes anaerobic because lack of oxygen. Anaerobes become predominant. The wood chips absorb the water, and then you drain the wood chips of the water, put it out on a little plastic tarp, and oxygen becomes a sterilizer, and it kills the anaerobes. Now you have that mycelium that I showed you, and you inoculate the wood chips, and the mycelium grows out like crazy. And so you've not used a laboratory, you use naturally occurring mushrooms with those fuzzy butts. You put those fuzzy butts directly then into the soaked wood chips that you've exposed to air. Air kills the anaerobes, the mycelium runs like crazy, and you create a mycelial lens. And so 5 or 6 stem butts can inoculate about the size of this table, and that's year 1. Year 2, you must keep the mycelium running. So you have to expand it. So typically you expand it between March to April for fruitings in October. But you create these mycelial lenses that you can then repetitively expand. And they're immunologically educated, so they're incredibly strong in their immune system for being able, so you can create a mushroom patch in your backyard. So this is the type of liberation of mycology. You don't have to buy from any business. You tie yourself directly to your sacrament. It's extremely under the radar. And then how often do you really need to imbibe in these mushrooms? I only imbibe in them once or twice a year. So for making your own, for your family, a small little mushroom patch means you're not buying from a drug dealer, or somebody else you don't know where the mushrooms came from. It ties you into the biology and the mycology of the consciousness of psilocybin. Folks, I want to thank you very much. I just want to say, this is a revolution.
Thank you so much, Paul. Sporiers.
What the fuck?
Paul is going to be doing.
Michael was the best of teachers. He was kind and patient and funny, and he never shamed me, not once. I would say the stupidest things, and he never mocked me, and he would laugh with me. He would turn my embarrassment around into humor, and in that humorous state, I was so receptive to his criticism. That's a good lesson for us all. Don't shame somebody, help them evolve, right?